Thank you very much. And it's nice to see everybody here this morning. So my name's Nigel Mitchell, and I'm head of nutrition for Team Sky, which is a professional cycling team. And I'd like to thank Julian and Sebastian for inviting me here today. I'd also like to thank the speakers yesterday for providing such an excellent science background for today. And especially Mike for the presentation we're doing there about fluid, because that's meant that's really been able to set the scene for some of the things I'm going to be talking about. And I'd also just like to make a little apology for if some people have seen some of my slides before. I still need to use these because they help to contextualise what we do and how we work. So I want to take the opportunity to really talk about how we work in Team Sky, which is really important when we're looking at developing the strategies that we apply. And first of all, one of the things that we always try to do is keep things focused on the goal of what we're trying to achieve. So I'm just saying here that we need to be on the right tracks with things. And within sport, as practitioners, as scientists, sometimes we can focus on details that are not really going to impact on performance. And our whole philosophy is about what do we need to do to perform. And if this isn't going to help us to perform, then we don't want to invest time in it. And my role within Team Sky, part of my responsibilities, is really looking at every single area of nutrition. So that will go right from weight management of riders who are wanting to win the big races, the Grand Tours, to the looking at the food at the races, looking at the nutritional products that we use, thinking about special foods and adapting some of the traditional cycling foods to make them better for riders. And I'll touch on these as we go through because they're all very important when we're looking at fluid and fluid for the riders. And the way that we do things is we look at things very holistically. So it's not just thinking how much fluid will a bike rider need within this race. It's thinking actually how do we get that fluid to where we need it, and thinking about the fluid systems in the body as well. So it tends to be really very, very holistic. And part of my role is really looking at those systems and structures and then making sure that information is in a format that the staff at the races can use. So I'll just share with you some of the background of the team and why the Tour de France is very special, and then what is it that we're doing to actually deliver fluid to the riders. So this will be a picture that a lot of people will be familiar with, and fluid's always been important in bike racing and things such as the Tour de France, and possibly some of the riders would prefer it if we went back a few years and were a little bit more casual about it. But things have moved on, things have progressed, and we can see that there's many specialist products. And from a fluid point of view, one of the great things with a sport such as cycling is that people can eat and drink when they're on the bike. So we know that people have got a demand for while they're working. They can be riding up to 6-7 hours a day. For people who are interested in cycling, it was the start of the big classics yesterday. It was Milan-San Remo, which is just short of 300 kilometres. And after all that, I think it finished in 6 hours, 55 minutes. And after all that distance, it finished in a sprint. And we were fortunate to get third yesterday. We would have liked to have won it. We're always gutted when we don't win. But it's quite interesting when you're working with people that are exercising for such a long time. And when I look at the power profiles of the riders that were racing yesterday over 7 hours, then they tend to be about an average of about 250 watts for the whole day. So there's a lot of work done there. But the guys who are finishing are able to really put out much bigger powers towards the end of the race. One of the things this slide shows is the team nature of cycling. So down at the bottom right here, there's a picture of Mark Cavendish, who at the time was the world champion. And Mark there, he's acting as the water carrier. So he's gone back to the car, he's filling his jersey up full of bottles and taking them forward for the rest of the team. So it's very much a team sport. And we can eat and we can drink on the bike. Now for me, I come from a clinical nutritional background. I'm a dietitian, And what I want to do is understand what's happening in a unwell or in a ill or in a pathology, and then I can transfer that into understanding working better with athletes, and I can also turn that round. So I have a great interest in what goes wrong in the body, so we can understand better for when we're working with these athletes, and being able to transfer between the two, I think, helps to give a more rounded and in-depth approach to supporting athletes. So I'll just talk a little bit now about Team Sky. So Team Sky is a professional cycling team. It was set up in 2009 by Dave Brailsford, who is now Sir Dave Brailsford. And Dave, this is Dave at the bottom there talking to one of the riders. Dave thought that he had a little bit of spare time on his hands because he was the head of British Cycling, which is mainly winter with the track season, so he thought he had a little bit of spare time, so he thought he would set up a professional cycling team for in the summer. And I were in a fortunate position because I was the nutritionist with British Cycling. Dave asked me to work with the professional cycling team as well. And the idea was that we would win the Tour de France within 4 years with a British rider. And most importantly, we have a very, very, very strict anti-doping policy. So we believe that we could win it with a British rider within 4 years who was a clean rider as well. And at that time, many people said this is an impossible task because there was still a transition within the sport. And we managed to win the Tour de France on our third attempt. And then, unfortunately, we won it again last year. So that was our main focus with it. So what we want to try and do is minimise underperformance due to poor practice. So again, it's getting those basics right. What do we need to do to get things right? And if we can get the basics right all of the time, then we will actually perform better. We are really interested in the evidence base. So all of the people in the support team have got a very keen science interest. So we are all involved academically as well as practitioners, which we feel is very important so we can help to inform the academics, and we can also help to transfer some of that knowledge back into our world better. We always want to perform within the rules. We don't believe in cheating. And we work with world-class partners. So our team cars are Jaguars, which is really cool when you're driving around Europe in the sports breaks and things like that. And we've got really cool Pinarello bikes. And we've got a great nutrition partner in a company called CMP. And we work very closely with them to really develop bespoke products for us. So our philosophy is part of the nutrition fits in with the performance support team. And again, it's ensuring that the basics are covered at all time, focusing on quality, and it's a food-first policy that we have. So we really focus on the quality of the food. Later on, I'll have a slide of our chef, Soren, and some of the food he makes. And it's really important for us that riders are healthy and that they arrive at the races at their racing weight. We don't want riders losing weight in races. We want riders to turn up at their race weight. If they're losing weight in a race, that means they're under fueling, and therefore that might affect the performance. Maintaining an overall health through the race. A very important area to us is gut health. I was talking to Lars over breakfast and explaining to him, when you're wanting to have athletes who are racing day after day, maintaining their best performance, then their gut health is critical. And that's really critical to the fluid policy as well, to the fluid strategies, because if we don't have a gut that's working optimally, then we're not absorbing the fluids, we're not absorbing the nutrients. I'll talk a little bit more about that. The way that we think about things is that we have training and nutrition together, and we're trying to create this metabolic environment that supports health and performance. So this is just all the basic things. Training, this is helping to provide that stress, that stimulation for the protein signaling to help drive adaptation. And the way we think about it is nutrition fits in with that very nicely, and we'll adapt our nutrition strategies depending on what we're wanting to do for the athletes. Now, recovery, people talk about recovery in sport, and recovery means different things to different people. And very often people think about recovery And what they really think about is just the metabolic side, whereas actually what we are wanting with recovery is that the athlete is able to perform when we want them to perform. And so for us, this is metabolic, which is the fluid, carbohydrates, protein, fat, and that's actually really easy. We think this is really easy to provide these nutrients from this perspective, from a recovery point of view. People often say that it's a big challenge to get all this fluid, all this energy, and we don't find that a challenge. And we find if we get this right, then that helps to support more of the functional recovery and also the psychological. So all of these together really help from the overall health and recovery. So let's just talk briefly about the Tour de France. Most people will be familiar with the Tour de France. It's regarded as the premier cycling race in the world, but I just want to detail a little bit so we can then see why the fluid delivery is so important. So this year, it's the 101st Tour de France, and it's running from the 5th of July to the 27th, and there's 21 stages over 3,500 kilometres, and they've got different types of stages. So we have flat stages that end in exciting sprints, we've got hill stages, we've got mountain stages, and there's 5 that finish at altitude. And these tend to be quite moderate altitude, tend to be between 1,600 and 2,000 metres. But it's really interesting, when you're working with these athletes, they have to acclimatise to the altitude, otherwise a lot of them will struggle to perform at their best at that moderate altitude. And again, this is affecting things such as their carbohydrate utilisation and their fluid requirements, so we have to consider all of that. There's an individual time trial, and then we have 2 rest days. And the thing that people don't really understand about the rest days is that if you were riding 5-6 hours a day on a bike and you had a rest day, you'd just lay in bed all day. Whereas the riders tend to do 2 or 3 hours on a rest day as well. And the reason for this is that actually if they don't, then very often they'll supercompensate in many ways. And so the day after, they may be 2 or 3 kilos heavier, and they find it very difficult to actually get going on the bike. The legs feel very heavy, very bloated. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. But so actually on a rest day, they're still working very hard. So why are these races very special? Well, these pictures were taken a couple of weeks before the start of the Tour de France. We were doing some training on the mountains for the race, and we were wanting it to be really hot to help with the heat acclimatisation, and we had 4 days of where it were about 4 or 5 degrees and it was just raining all the time. And this is one of the issues with it, is that the climatic changes with these races can be incredible. So why is hydration important? We covered these areas yesterday, but we have to understand that environment can be very challenging, and we can also understand that thermoregulation is so important. And we know from some of the work we've done with the riders that when they're acclimatised, then the sweat rates are up to about 2 litres an hour. And we also find that they become conservative with their sodium concentration. So what we do with some of the riders in the winter, we'll look at the sodium concentrations and we'll monitor how that goes through the season. And what we see, as soon as they start doing a lot of work in the heat, that the sodium concentrations come down in the sweat. The potassium concentrations remain the same. And what we've done is then we've adapted the drinks that we use to accommodate this. We talked to a lot of professional riders that have ridden in other teams, and one of the things they've said is when they're riding some of these races where they've been having really high sodium loads, then they've gained weight throughout the races, which we just think is a water retention due to the high sodium. Again, when we look at the what's hydration doing for us, the gut health is so important to us. If we're not maintaining that gut function, then we're not absorbing all the nutrients and we're not recovering. So Tour de France, some of the environmental conditions, the temperature can range from 40 to 40 degrees Celsius. I couldn't find any of the WBT figures at all, but we know that it can get hot. But importantly, most of the time, it's not a huge issue, because when the riders are in the peloton and they're riding, they're creating the wind, which has the convection cooling effect. The problem comes is when they're on the mountains and we get the radiant heat coming off the mountain. And that is when the problem really starts with the guys. If it's a mountaintop finish and it's a hot day, then that's when we tend to have real problems. July tends to be France's hottest and driest month as well, which again can have an effect. So ensuring effective hydration, gut health and gut care, we invest heavily on maintaining the gut function of riders, and I'll talk a little bit of how we do that. There's common gastric issues within sports, such as bloating, diarrhea, cramping, gastroenteritis, and the only issues we have is when people will pick up some sort of a gut bug, so we don't get the normal sporting stomach problems that athletes talk about of reflux and bloated stomachs due to the drinks and the gels. I'll explain why a little bit in a bit. So, from the gut health point of view, we know that riders can be vulnerable, but some of the things we can help is we understand that heat reduces the gut function, the microvilli viability, which is not much we can do about that, but we can help to protect the gut. And we know that actually drinking a lot of acidic drinks, low pH, affects the gut. And so most sports drinks on the market have got a pH of about 3.5, and we've developed sports drinks which are neutral pH. And this helps a great deal in helping with the stomach. We also know that exercise reduces the blood flow to the central organs. Is this one not working? We're both working. Okay. And we also know, as we saw yesterday, that when we're exercising, we're reducing that blood flow to the central organs. So again, trying to protect it as much as we can. Said before, the riders are in this environment where things can be flicked off the road, so we have to be very careful of what they consume. Again, part of the whole fluid balance with the riders is then also understanding about how fluid moves through the body. And one of the things that we're very interested in is the lymphatic system. So the lymphatic system is this ancillary circulating system that helps to drain away the interstitial fluid. And we believe that this is a very important system for the athletes. And we think that this helps us to understand that when they've had long flights or they've had rest days where they can get this bloating. So we try and help them to manage this. And things like compression tights can really help with that with the riders. So understanding the overall system can help us support the riders better. So we've developed what we call a positive hydration strategy. And the way that we like to work is we always want to really get it into the riders' minds what is important and what is going to help them. We find that if they believe that this is going to be of value to them, then they buy into it. So if we were going to call this just drinking, then they wouldn't find it quite as exciting. Whereas if we call it a positive hydration strategy, then they find it quite sexy and they buy into it. And for the physicians that are in the room, for us in cycling in our team, these guys are so important to us because we have a race doctor at every single race, and they manage this process, they oversee this process at the race. So I designed that process and the doctors help to manage that for us. We think that prevention is better than a cure. So we provide drinks for riders without them asking for it. We try to focus on getting an appropriate electrolyte balance. We monitor fluid status, and I'll tell you how we do that in a minute. We're looking at some of the changes in weight and urine concentrations. Each rider is weighed on a morning and they give a urine sample to the doctor. And at that time, that's an opportunity for us to give them a drink, which they'll start taking on a morning just to get their system going. So what we have here is on the top right-hand corner is a picture of the race bus. And this is absolute luxury. There's only 9 seats on this bus, and the seats pretty much fully recline. And when the riders get on a bus, they all have a bottle of what we call hydro juice on the bus, waiting for them to start drinking when they're on the bus to the race. But when the riders wake up in the morning, they see the doctor and they're given a drink. At breakfast, there's plenty of different drinks available, and one of the things that we use is a lot of vegetable juice as well. And the idea with the vegetable juice is, one, it helps to alkalise the gut, which is helping to manage this neutral pH within the gut. But also, what it means is by feeding a vegetable juice is that we can feed all the nutrients, but without them taking the bulk with all the fibre and the pith. So this is something we developed a few years ago, so the riders are not necessarily having to think about eating loads of salads and loads of vegetables. They can actually drink those nutrients from the juice itself. Then we said on the way there's a litre and a half of juice on the bus, and all of the foods that we give the riders tend to be are designed to provide fluid as well. So this picture just at the side there is of the rice cakes that we've developed. So the rice cakes is our main race food, and so this is like a solid rice pudding, and so this provides carbohydrate, provides protein, but it also provides fluid as well, because this is fresh cooked rice. So this is not dry food. So as we're actually feeding the riders, we're actually maintaining hydration as well with them. And then after the race on the bus, we'll have things like potatoes or other foods again, which are going to help not only to provide some of the energy, but also fluid as well. The choice of fluid is important. We know that adherence just to drinking water isn't great, so we've developed what we call the hydro juice, and that is just basically a diluted fruit juice. So the guys who'll drink this is just 1 part juice to 4 parts water. We've also developed this neutral pH sports drink, and we also have a high juice gel that we've developed as well. So these all help to provide fluid in a very GI friendly way for while the guys are racing. I mentioned before about the vegetable juice as well. So just a little bit about monitoring. This is really basic stuff. What we do here is the riders are weighed on a morning, urine sample taken, we're just looking at the urine osmolality and the weight, and we look at the variation. So obviously if the concentration's gone up and the weight's gone down, we believe they're a little bit more dehydrated. So the doctor will just push more fluids. And what we tend to see over the course of 21 days is very little variation over 1 kilogram. So one day the rider might be 70, there might be 69.5 the next day, might be 70.2 the next. So it's that type of fluctuation, nothing more than about a kilo. And this is just recorded using this type of a spreadsheet. And if we have a concern about a rider, they'll be weighed after the race as well. So they'll be weighed on a morning after the race, and we'll look at those differences. And if we feel that we need to, then we'll push more fluids just to correct that fluid balance there. I promised a little picture of Soren, our chef. So Soren's probably one of the best chefs. He's definitely one of the best chefs that I've ever come across. He's a proper chef in that anybody gets near his food or anywhere near his stuff, he'll nearly kill people. And he produces fantastic foods for the riders. And part of this, again, is trying to provide foods that are not only giving all the nutrients, we really want to be very nutrient dense with what we feed them, but also helping with the fluid side as well. And then just to finish with a little plug, the Tour de France is starting in Yorkshire this year. For people who don't know where Yorkshire is, it's where I live. I never believed that I'd see the Tour de France coming to Yorkshire, so I would advise and recommend anybody here who's interested in the Tour de France coming to Yorkshire, and I've still got a couple of spare rooms in my house if anybody wants to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we've got time only for one question.
Thank you, Nigel. Very, very interesting stuff. Very applied with the riders. You mentioned that you designed the food and some of the the drinks and the gels for the riders. Can you talk a bit about what you guys have designed compared to what is commercially available?
Okay. So the drinks in particular are quite interesting because the drinks, as I say, have got a neutral pH. So the challenge there is having something that has still got a reasonable taste, because the citric acid is put into sports drinks to enhance the flavour. But when you put the citric acid in, it reduces the pH. So the drinks that we've designed are of citric acid free, and also the flavours are designed to be very subtle. So if you try one of these drinks, they don't taste great, but they don't taste bad. And the idea with that is that it's something that people are comfortable to drink day after day after day after day. And so what we find is we get a very low taste fatigue with the riders. So that's one of the points. And also sodium content's a little bit lower than most sports drinks. And the reason for that is that, one, they're consuming a lot of drinks, and the other is that their sodium content in their sweat tends to be a little bit lower. So we find that we don't really need that much. And from the gels point of view, it's a juice-based concept that we came up with because a lot of the riders were wanting to take more gels in a race, but with conventional gels, again, we found that they weren't great for the stomach.
Are you also familiar with the beetroot juice for the riders?
Yes.
Sometimes?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where to start with that one. We've been familiar with nitrates and the effect of nitrates for about 15 years, but in our population, it's not something that's of any benefit. And one of the things I'd just like to finish with as well is just to say, what I've wanted to present today, there's a lot of people here with a lot of expertise, so if anybody's actually got any suggestions of how they think we could do things better, then please collar me afterwards and just give me the recommendations.
Thanks, Nigel. Very interesting presentation.
Thank you.